How can you possibly know if you should sell your business, what you should sell your business for, if you're ready to sell your business, if you have no idea if that business sale and that amount on an after-tax basis can actually fund your lifestyle, right? And the lifestyle that you want to lead. I'm out there talking about private equity. I'm talking about acquisition activity. I'm talking about preparing your business to sell and all these different things. But ultimately, I run and founded a wealth management company called Essential Partners. What I do and my firm does is we manage money for folks in the lawn and landscape industry and other trades, residential and commercial services. After they sell their business, we manage the money and mitigate taxes on the investments after the business sale. What we really focus on though are people that are maybe 1 to 2 years away from the business sale and start to help them think about that decision on whether or not they're going to sell. Am I gonna have enough money if I do sell my business? How much tax am I gonna pay on the transaction? And is there something that we can do to lower that tax bill? And then ultimately the biggest pain point is, how am I actually going to invest the money in order to support my lifestyle while enjoying my lifestyle, spending what I need to spend, but not running out of money? It's really important to understand the difference between managing money and helping business owners versus non-business owners. Most business owners in these businesses, their whole net worth, 99% of their net worth is wrapped up in their business, right? And you control the decisions within that business. You control whether or not you make more money, if you spend money, if the business grows, if the business creates value, okay? And then one day, you may sell this business, and now instead of having a business that you control, you have a pile of cash, okay? And so as someone who ends up managing that pile of cash for a lot of different business owners, that's a totally different paradigm psychologically and from a portfolio construction perspective, okay? So if you have an executive, they may have squirreled away investments along their career. They built up to a couple $1,000,000, and that's all in public markets. It's in bonds, it's in stocks, et cetera, et cetera. Like, they're used to it. They've always sort of ceded control to the public markets, but a business owner has never ceded control, all right? And so that just needs to be managed very differently. It needs to be, a less aggressive approach initially. It needs to be more gradual. There needs to be time that's taken. And ultimately, it has to be a less volatile approach, in my experience. A lot of folks, they go into a sale or they are thinking about a sale. And again, it's back to this concept of emotions. Their employee, maybe their team is wearing them out. Maybe they lost a couple customers. Maybe their customers are wearing them out, right? And then it just becomes this emotional purge of like, oh my God, I'm done. I'm like selling this thing, right? Like, that private equity guy called me. That strategic buyer called me. I had a call earlier today with a business owner, and they're like, I'm just sick of babysitting adults. And then they just go and they punt the business, right? They sell the business without really doing the diligence, putting in the quantitative research on their business, the buyer, et cetera. So what we do, just to keep it simple, just like a possible paths analysis, right? So we would sit down with the business owner and say, okay, let's go through just like some basic financial metrics. What's your revenue? What's your EBITDA, if you know it? If not, like, let's figure it out. Let's pull up your CPA's financial statements and let's look at those numbers. And then let's roll them forward. So what do we think revenue is likely to grow? What do we think your EBITDA margin is likely to be over time? And then not only just conceptualize it, but quantitatively say, okay, if we apply a 5 times EBITDA multiple to your business today, it's worth this. If we apply 10 times, it's worth this. And then take that out at different points in the future in order to say, all right, if you grow at 15% a year for the next 3 years, EBITDA margins go from X% to Y%, put a multiple on that in different scenarios, we think your business could be worth this, all right? And then the next step for them is thinking like, all right, how can I actually get there? Like operationally, I'm not the operation expert. I'm not a consultant, right? I'm not a broker either, like for people that don't know. But But what we want to do is then say, all right, under these different scenarios, what does that actually mean for your life? All right. Because for me, as someone that's like very numbers based and detail oriented, it's like, all right, how can you possibly know if you should sell your business, what you should sell your business for, if you're ready to sell your business, if you have no idea if that business sale and that amount on an after-tax basis can actually fund your lifestyle, right? And the lifestyle that you want to lead. Okay. So without really threading the needle from the pre-sale to the tax, to the investments, to the after-tax cash flow on investments, to me, it's just a completely incomplete analysis, right? And so that's why I focus pre-sale. And that's why some people get confused, like, Nick, like, what the heck do you even do? Right? Because I'm talking about pre-sale because I want people to be ready. But at the end of the day, I'm a money manager that focuses on after-tax returns, right? But it's all about somebody's entire life and the life they want to lead. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. Okay. So if you're just thinking, hey, I'm running these routes, I'm generating cash flow, it's enough for me and my family to live, but you're not really thinking about selling your business or selling your routes, whatever the case may be, like, you might get hit by a bus. Okay. And if you get hit by a bus and you haven't thought about, the enterprise value or the equity value of your business, guess what's going to happen? Like your spouse is going to be sitting there with like these routes or this business that is in no place to be able to sell to anyone and is not going to have any like underlying true enterprise or equity value. Okay. And that's a bad situation. And to me, it provides a really powerful why. Okay. So like you may not want to sell, you may not think it's worth your time, but like if you have a why that's driven by if something happens to you, how are you leaving this asset to your family? Okay. And what position are they going to be in? Like first things first, or really just getting your house in order from a reporting standpoint. Okay. So without having that proper accounting and reporting information, like first of all, how do you even know what your business is doing, right? Like we're talking about EBITDA. You don't even have proper books to be able to calculate EBITDA, right? So that's like the first thing. And that can be financial accounting. It can be management accounting, right? So you also mentioned LMN and making sure you're doing, proper job costing and all that sort of thing. And so those are really the first steps, right? And then once you have that information, then you can start to set up your business to be more efficient, right? So you're thinking about, all right, what is my EBITDA margin? What is my growth? What's the combination of those two? And how can I inflect those in the right direction based on the information that I now have? And then making those business decisions to try to increase growth, increase margins, okay? And that includes being more efficient, right? Like just overall, like private equity actually, one thing they get hit over the head by like just society in general is that, oh, they're just going to come in, they're going to cut a bunch of costs, they're going to fire a bunch of my team. No one wants that, right? And no one does want that, okay? But if you have the growth, there's ways to support that growth more efficiently. So maybe you don't have to hire as much people and you can pay the people more that you do have and reward them. Okay. So trying to then optimize growth and margins. And also I'll throw out another metric, return on capital. So if you're buying a piece of equipment, what's the incremental EBITDA in dollars that you're getting on that investment? Okay. That's something else that private equity would just, hit home on. So that's another step that can be taken. And then I think just like systems, procedures, documentation of all of those things. Again, these things all tie hand in hand, right? The reporting, the efficiency, the systems, right? Like it's all a thread that weaves through the business. The other thing is getting yourself out of the business. Any business owner should be trying to get themselves out of the business in some capacity, right? Or allowing others to do what the business owner doesn't have to be the one doing, right? So you can focus on your zone of genius where other people are focusing and developing into bigger and more responsible roles over time, right? Because, when someone comes knocking, especially if you're a bigger company, you're likely to be a platform acquisition. They want to know that that business isn't entirely dependent on you and your wife, potentially, right? Or your family. And so anytime you could do that, I think it just like leads to a more sustainable, durable business that has more underlying value versus like, congratulations, you started a business and now you just have a different job. Folks going into a transaction and not really understanding how that's going to lead to them living the type of life that they want to live. Okay. So do they have enough money actually to retire? So yeah, $5 million sounds like a lot of money, is a lot of money. It's a tremendous amount of money. But if that person is spending $700,000 a year, they're going to run out of money pretty quick, right? So that's like broadly a problem of not necessarily beginning the sale process with the end in mind. The end being, can your investments in your portfolio support your lifestyle that you want to lead? Okay. After you maybe blow a little money on certain purchases and things that you think you want or need. Okay. So that's one. I also think that one problem I've seen is that people get bad advice on tax going into the transaction. So, I had one case about, 18 months ago or so where their longtime CPA that they loved, that had always done right by them. This was, I think it's like an $18 million transaction, told them that their taxes were going to be 15%. No, I think even less. It might have been they told them it was going to be 10%. And they were really 26%. Okay. So you can imagine that's millions of dollars in a mistake, right? Just because even though they're with a CPA, they're not familiar with transactions or aren't necessarily attuned to doing something like that all day, every day. That emotional aspect we talked about and just like getting sick of the business and purging it to the first buyer that shows up is one mistake. And I think another mistake is if you get wined and dined by private equity because they just love you so much, okay? And they just want to go out to dinner with you and your wife, and tell you how great you are. Basically going with the first private equity firm that shows up, or the private equity firm that is the best at whispering sweet nothings in your ear. Right? So we all have our affinity for certain people that we relate to. Okay. But again, you have to take that emotion and that, sweet talking out of the picture and actually survey and talk to as many private equity firms or as many strategic acquirers as you can. I think when it comes to money, like there's a lot of research and work that's been done over the past probably 15, 20 years on just like behavioral psychology as it relates to finance and money, right? Our brains were not hardwired, through thousands and thousands of years to be able to deal with like the current environment and money. Take the example of loss aversion. Like if we suffer a loss or if we think we're going to suffer a loss, like studies have shown that our brain processes that loss as being 2 times more painful than, let's say, a commensurate gain would be. Okay. So we have like these built-in biases when it comes to the emotions around money that we just have to be aware of and deal with. One thing that's helpful about this emotional aspect is trying to keep some emotional distance from you and your money. It's far harder to manage your own money than it is for someone else to manage your money. Okay. So having that emotional distance from it to where, hey, let's say someone has 30, 40, 50, 60% of their money in the stock market and the stock market goes down 30%. Okay. And now you, as someone who's managing your money, has to make that decision of, do I sell everything or do I ride this out with the understanding that over time, that's always recovered. People have found that it's much easier to have someone else make that decision and sort of talk them off the ledge, if you will, in order to, make the next right decision when fear takes over. If we were to wind back, to my career on Wall Street, I used to work for a firm, and this one particular fund at this firm was a $30 billion fund. Okay. And this is like 20 years ago. And that fund had around 25 to 30 stocks in that fund. Okay. So if you do the math, like that's about $1 billion in each particular stock. And I was responsible for, anywhere from 3 to 4 stocks within that fund at any given time. Okay. So after going through, doing the research on those companies, meeting with management, and then going and saying like, you know what, I think we should keep this stock, I think we should sell it, or I think we should buy more, right? You're talking about billion-dollar decisions. When you sort of have your feet to the fire at a very young age, I think I was in my late 20s at that time, like making those types of decisions, it sort of calluses you in some way for decisions that come much later in your career when you've been through that. Like one piece of advice that I always give to, let's say, mid-career owners or young owners is to actually get a good CPA, right? We've talked about the importance of having good books and records and even management accounting in order to make good decisions about your business. But also there's different variations of CPAs when it comes to tax and tax planning. I think our tendency, especially when we're young and have no money, which like we've all been there, right? Present company included for sure, is like, I want to get the cheapest CPA, right? But I think it behooves most people, depending on where they are, like certainly business owners, to get a value-based CPA. So someone that's, going to save you money vis-a-vis the fee they're charging, right? That's the metric to me, not, oh, I got my return done for $100 and I paid, 5,000 extra bucks in taxes. Okay. All right. I think that's an important thing to think about. The other thing is that I know everybody's probably heard of it and I'm just preaching to the choir, but I see the statements like people aren't doing it, is to start a Roth IRA. Okay. So yes, there's 401k, there's simple IRA and those types of things that are driven by the company, and people should be doing that. But something that they can do irrespective of that is to do a Roth IRA. Okay. And so a Roth IRA, as many of the folks out there probably know, it allows you, and these contributions change from year to year, around like $7,000, okay, that you can contribute to a Roth IRA. And these are $7,000 that you've already paid tax on, okay? So you contribute $7,000 to that, and your spouse can do it as well, okay? So that's $14,000 a year. But that Roth IRA, if you just contribute $14,000 a year for you and your spouse total for 20 years, and you earn around, let's say, an 8% return, something reasonable, you have $1 million at the end of 20 years, right? And it sounds small. It sounds like maybe a pain because people don't take the time to actually go do it. But over time, that's extremely impactful, right? And put your kids on payroll, right? Have them actually do something tangible in the business to earn that, which like obviously you're developing principles and, integrity with them and work ethic and all that. But you can pay them through the business, and then you can take that money and contribute to a Roth IRA for them. If we rewind the clock, let's say 20 plus years, I haven't been in wealth management that entire time, but I've been in the investment business. So I spent around 20 years on Wall Street helping to manage money for big institutions like pensions, endowments, mutual funds, and those types of, sophisticated investors. And then when I started Essential Partners, around 5 years ago or so, 5+ years ago, and I was building this business from the ground up, one of my first clients that I got was a pest control company, top 20 in the country pest control company. And as I continued to grow my business, I thought about like, what types of problems do I want to solve? Who do I like working with? And where do I think there's actually a great business opportunity? And so the reason I got into the green industry is that after getting a few pest control clients and seeing the private equity wave that was sort of encircling that industry, and then seeing, the related wave that was doing the same thing in the green industry, I thought that was an underserved area. There weren't a lot of wealth management folks in that area. And I wanted to get in front of that private equity wave as well to be able to help a lot of people that were going through transactions and needed help with investments and tax.